Hello and welcome to the Messy Studio. And this is episode number 171. And it is the first time that we've used this video platform, StreamYard, for an interview or a conversation. So today, that conversation is between myself and my good friend and partner at Cold Wax Academy, Jerry McLaughlin. So welcome, Jerry.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's really good to be here in a same but different format.
Right. We're very used to being in this format for our Cold Wax Academy live sessions. So
Yeah.
it's a little different doing a podcast. And we really wanted to just be kind of a conversation about the topic that is taking challenges and risks in relation to your art practice. And these are situations that, just to say what we're talking about, there's situations that come up that seem a little bit challenging, scary, a little bit out of your comfort zone kind of thing. And we can often hesitate or maybe say no to these things, but they can really make a big difference. So being willing to say yes to things is kind of a basic attitude of being open to possibility. And it's not easy for everybody.
No, it's not. It's interesting because one of the things I often talk about with people is the importance of saying no, because often people have a hard time saying no. But there's also this problem of saying yes, and that yes can be to, sometimes quite large things, like maybe giving a talk or having your first solo show. But sometimes it's just small things that it's hard to say yes to, like, oh, I think I want to try to make a larger painting, or I want to try to, be more colorful in my work, something seemingly innocuous.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, the whole time, if you're working on a painting, and the kind of painting that's changing as you do it, the kind of this process-orienting painting that we teach and talk about, it's like there's a million little risks in there.
Yeah.
You're going to scrape this color away, and it's not going to come back, or you're going to do something that's going to change the painting a lot. And so often with, when we're teaching or talking to other artists, I mean, every time, if I had a nickel for every time somebody said, I really want to change this, but I'm afraid I'll wreck it. I mean, that's an example of, it's just kind of an everyday risk, right? That's
Yeah.
a very, very common thing for people to feel like, I'm afraid to take this risky little leap into some difference in my painting, and yet not really happy with where it's at.
Right.
And so they're
Right.
kind of poised on the edge of moving into something that they honestly they could go through a phase of the painting has gone downhill.
Yeah.
We see it,
Yeah.
we do it all the time, right?
Oh,
I
all the
am
time.
constantly wrecking paintings. Um, and I suppose with practice, you start to recognize that those smaller risks usually can work your way out of them
Yeah.
if you do kind of go over a cliff.
Yeah. I mean, I think that thing you're talking about, it comes up even just in everyday life where people may not like where they are, what they're in, but they're comfortable and they're familiar. And so I think the same thing happens in a painting, that you get to a certain point that you are comfortable and familiar with, and then you're trying to grow and expand as an artist, even if it's just by the smallest steps. And that means taking that little tiny risk in, letting go of this comfort. I've gotten to this comfortably, and it's a little uncomfortable to take that risk of ruining it and making it worse. But just to me, just like in life, if that's how you live, if that's how you paint, then you rob yourself, or you rob your paintings of the potential for more every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think you have to ask yourself, in the smaller situations and the bigger ones, what am I afraid of?
Mhm.
What is holding me back here?
Right.
Is it if it's I'm afraid of a change in my painting, I think you have to kind of embrace that, because something is telling you it's time to change. It's time to try something new.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm always kind of impressed when people are learning to paint the risk that they take. They're willing to try all kinds of things,
Mhm.
and they're willing to show them to people and talk about them. And then sometimes as we get more and more into a particular way of working, um, it's a little bit harder to make changes. And they do feel a little bit riskier because you have gotten to that comfortable place, that voice, that
Yeah.
stage where you kind of know what comes next if you want to go that way.
Yeah. Yeah, in the beginning, it's as though you don't have anything to lose because you haven't really acquired, comfort or skill. It's all just kind of fresh and naive. And
Hmm.
then once you get to a certain point, you start to gain a certain amount of confidence, and that feels good. And I think that there's this feeling of letting go of that a little bit, okay, I've worked this far, I've worked this hard, I've gotten this far, and now am I gonna take a step back? um, but that's, even if you make a series of paintings that are worse than the paintings you made before, that's
Yeah.
not a step back, especially if you're trying something new. In fact, that's growth, even though it's not necessarily
Hmm.
growth in product, it's growth internally.
And you almost have to expect that if you're really changing something, you have to work through it just like you would as a beginner. If you're going to make a big change, you're going to try a new medium, or you're going to um, change your scale or something.
Yeah.
It's not automatic that you're going to make it work.
No,
Um,
and in fact, I would think if you say you're changing and you never really fail or take a few steps back, then my question would be, are you really changing? Are you really pushing
yeah.
yourself?
Hmm.
Um, Maybe you think you're pushing yourself, because I think when people really push, they do fail.
Yeah. Um, so those are the kind of the small, I think the small steps that we take in the studio in a bigger context, because
Hmm.
those small steps do lead to bigger change.
Yeah.
Um, and then there are those bigger ones, those bigger challenges and risks. And I know both of us have taken these.
Hmm.
I think if you talk to anybody um, whose art career is progressing, who's out there with their work, who has basically focused their life on their work, anybody will tell you they've made some kind of tough choices and accepted some challenges to get there.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I mean, I think for both of us, we've kind of, I don't know, said, yeah, we're all in with our business. And that was a huge risk, which
Hmm.
is related to both of our art practices. But,
Hmm.
I guess we were sort of talking the other day that it's been, 6 years since we first started to write the book. And of course, the legendary story is that I wasn't all that excited about taking that risk.
No, not even a little bit.
You had to convince me, and that has been a bit of a pattern for me, honestly, where you know I I am presented with an opportunity, and mm, I'm a little cautious.
Mhm.
You were quite convincing, but that was a big deal to step in and devote that amount of time to writing a book. We didn't really know each other very well in
Mhm.
the beginning
No,
at all. We didn't know each other at all when you approached
no.
me. So, um, I remember talking to some friends, or to Don or whatever, and saying, I'm kind of worried about this. And some people were very supportive, like, yes. And some people were like, who is this guy? What's he trying to do? Is he some kind of con guy?
Oh, yes.
But it's like, all these years later, and look back and say, well, it all worked out so well. I mean,
Right.
we're doing well with our business, and we've done other projects, um, and yet in the beginning, it was definitely a little bit scary.
Mhm. I mean, I think all of those things that we're talking about, big or small, you have to ask yourself, what is the real risk? I mean, really, what is the real risk?
Mhm.
Whether it's in your painting, you're going to try this thing, and so what's the risk that this painting doesn't turn out? Okay, well, that's one painting in a lifetime of paintings, or two or three paintings in a lifetime. Or like jumping in and doing this book. I mean, what's the worst? We write the book, it doesn't go anywhere. So, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think that these bigger risks, they are asking for a commitment.
hmm
That's somebody approaches you with something. They want you to do something that's a little bit of a challenge for you. And so it makes sense to look at it. I mean, we're not saying jump into everything.
no,
You
no,
know,
not at all.
you have to be discerning. And as you were saying, sometimes you do have to say no. And people are approached about things that really aren't going to help them. They're going
Right.
to be some kind of something that takes a lot of time that doesn't really get them anywhere,
Mhm.
or they may not really enjoy. Um, so absolutely, we have to be discerning and look at it and just be objective. But then to make that commitment, I think that's kind of the scary part,
Yeah.
because if you're making a commitment of your time, you're to somebody else, at least you're giving up something else. You're probably
hmm
sacrificing something in order to embark on a project. Whether it's for yourself or whether you're involved with somebody else doing it. Um, and
Yeah.
that is something to lose. You're losing your time, maybe.
Yeah.
So I think um, that's why that's what always gets me is the time. I
Mm.
think, how can I, if it sounds like a good idea, it sounds great. Okay, I already feel, like there's a lot going on. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
how am I going to do this? How am I going to fit
Yeah.
this in? And
Yeah.
that's always been my kind of stumbling point.
Interesting. I mean, I think that's legitimate. I mean, everyone's got, very, very, seems like increasingly limited amounts of time. But you brought up commitment. And for me, one of the things I notice in artists is a struggle often to commit, to little things and to big things.
Hmm.
Commit to a medium, commit to a style, commit to a subject matter, commit to a palette, commit to making a series.
Hmm.
Well, if that is tough for you, then it's probably not a stretch to say it might be tough to make a commitment to, doing a solo show or speaking in front of
Hmm.
a group of people or doing a project, because the risk becomes incrementally higher, and
Hmm.
I think your exposure, your kind of vulnerability to, even if it's just perceived failure or inadequacy at something, even if the outside world thinks everything is great, we're exposing ourselves to that insecurity, and I can see why it can be really, really challenging.
Hmm.
But that doesn't make it not important. In fact, I think it makes it all the more important.
Right. Well, I think that's a good point, that any of these things, large or small, whether it's, as you were saying, something in your art practice, or it's something where maybe you're responsible to another person, to a gallery, to somebody that you've agreed to do something with. um, yeah, that that aspect of commitment, it also frees you, though, I think, once you do commit and you get to that point, then you're all in,
hmm
and then you're going to do it. So that maybe that is really the tipping point
hmm Yeah,
of getting to that point.
yeah, and I think that there, at least for me, there is a reward in commitment, a deep internal reward, because commitment to me is the same thing as choosing.
Hmm.
And choosing is freedom. And, artists, I mean, really, art is about freedom. It's about doing what you want and choosing what you want. And if choosing is commitment, then I love that. But
Hmm.
it's hard. And so I do think that that's kind of a tipping point where you decide, that art is the thing you're doing, or this event is the thing you're doing. Then really going all in is important, because then
Hmm.
then the next thing to success is following through on that.
Yeah, and it's a sense of purpose that is, that's really solid and important in your
Mhm.
work, and
Mhm.
it helps people, not feel like they're drifting around and just trying this and that. But yeah, it kind of all lines up in a good way.
Mhm.
But they're really, I don't know. I was sort of thinking about different things um, that challenge people when, like, in an art career. And one of the first things I think is, um, I think you just kind of mentioned it. I saying, I'm committed to my art.
Yeah.
That is a huge step for a lot of people.
Oh my
I mean,
God.
we work with a lot of people who come at this later in life. They've had another career. Um, that's one group of people. It can apply to anybody that says, this is
Mhm.
what I'm doing. But for a group of people that have had a different commitment for many years, and
Mhm.
other people don't see them as artists necessarily.
Mhm.
Their family and friends may say, "Oh, it's something you do," but
Right.
that step where you commit to it,
Mhm.
that's really challenging, really risky.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
yeah. And
I
and
mean, it's
and it may not be your response, if people see you as mother or sister or father or brother or friend, and you suddenly say, I'm sorry, I can't be this for you right now because I'm being artist person, as important and special as that might be to you, it might not generate a very positive response in people. So that kind of commitment and that risk can feel substantial if these people are,
absolutely
important to you.
that's a that's a personal emotional struggle that
Absolutely.
and we know a lot of people that have gone through that and
Hmm.
face
Yeah.
that all the time. And
Yeah.
so you commit to making it a priority. That's a risk. You commit to spending money on it. I mean, that's risky as well. That's really
Right.
challenging. You're going to rent a studio. You're going to buy supplies. You're going to um, take an online teaching experience.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, we Jerry and I have been doing this, Cold Wax Academy sessions, and I so respect the people that have taken the leap to do that, and they all seem
Mhm.
really happy with it. But
Mhm.
you know, I know that's a big leap, and
Yep.
that's a commitment of time, commitment of
Yep.
money,
Right.
of everything, of focus,
Right.
um, and you know, it's a challenge and a risk. We challenge people there to do things that they're probably that's new to them
Mhm.
and a bit scary at times, probably.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Because I
it's
think, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say it's upping your game.
Mhm.
That's this whole thing. This risk and challenge is I'm ready to move forward.
And all of those incremental steps of choosing and committing, in the end, they require more and more follow through.
Hmm.
They become more and more time consuming, more responsibility, like anything important, like relationships, like careers. The more you're in them, the more you're in them. Um,
Yeah,
but
it's a
the more,
slippery slope.
right? But the reward hopefully gets deeper and better too.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the whole thing about, if you get to the point of entering the art world as a professional, whatever that means, and that's a little bit hard to define, but when you start exhibiting your work and selling your work and showing your work in a bigger context, um, the challenges just start coming at you,
Hmm.
and it's part of your success. But it is difficult, and I think a reason many people are uncomfortable with taking that step. They want to, they're attracted to the idea, but it's really hard that first time that you walk into a gallery to show them your work or make a phone call to set up an appointment or whatever it is. It's really hard. It's still hard for me after all these years to put myself out there.
Oh, so I remember when I approached just a co-op gallery. So a gallery where the members in the gallery are the ones who exhibit, and just applying, and then them saying, well, yes, we'll consider your application, but we want to come over to your studio and see your space and your work and all of that. I was terrified because
Yeah.
then suddenly I kept feeling like, oh my God, I'm going to get exposed as a fraud. They're going to realize that I don't know anything.
You're going
This
to
is
realize that
all
you
like a
don't actually have a studio full of paintings, which you did. I mean, these things are kind of ridiculous when we look at them and we say, what are we afraid of?
Mhm.
The people you deal with in galleries, the people you deal with in whatever situation, they're just people,
Right.
you know, but it is, I mean, it is really hard. And then once you enter that world, there's other things that come at you. Like
Mhm.
the first time you're asked to talk about your work, let's say, well, maybe part of an exhibit. Your work is
Mhm.
on the walls, and they say, "Oh, and we'd like you to say a few words at the exhibit."
Right, exactly. But could you make some opening remarks? Sure.
And I've actually had that happen to me kind of last minute where I was not prepared. But if you're prepared, it's just as nerve-wracking. I mean,
Mhm.
um, it's everybody's sitting there looking at you and or standing, and there you are. And wow, public speaking is really challenging for a lot of people.
A
I
and
remember when you and I did that in the last show that we had about a year ago in California. And
oh, yeah.
remember that we had it was a show about poetry. We had to
Mhm.
talk about that relationship between our work, poetry, and
Yeah.
we did it. We were fine, but
Right.
yeah, the public speaking thing is really tough. Um, and anything professionally you're asked to do, where you have to have it together, you have to
Mhm.
sound good and look good, and be on topic, and it's
When I first got asked to jury a show, and not
that's
like
a hard
a
one.
little
Yeah,
like, a show at a little like local,
coffee
hall that
shop or
somebody's
something.
right. I mean, it was like a national abstract exhibit, and I was like, really? Okay. And suddenly you have to start examining, yourself and stepping it up and it was, not only was I insecure about it, but I realized that any deficits that I had in my abilities to do that, I needed to remedy those. I needed to
Mhm,
examine where my deficits were and then work on those so that I could meet the challenge because I wanted to. I wanted to
mhm,
do it. And I think that's true with anything we do. You need to ask yourself where you are, and if you want to move that next step forward, what do you need to do to get there, whether it's big
mhm.
or small, and
And
be honest.
sometimes you don't really know. And
No,
I'm
that's true.
thinking about,
That's true.
you know, I'm thinking about the first time I went on an artist residency. So, yeah, I was invited to this artist residency in Spain, and it came at me out of the blue. I was really kind of unprepared for it, and yet it was so exciting. And it was another time in my life where I said, "Yeah, this is risky and challenging. This is a remote village in the Pyrenees in Spain. I've never been out of the country except briefly to Canada and Mexico. I'm going to travel to Europe, and I'm going to find my way to this village, and I'm going to be there with other artists from around the world." And it was a wonderful experience, and I've been to a lot of artist residencies since then, but that first one was really daunting, and I'm so
Mhm.
glad I did it, though. I mean, it was, but when you were I was saying you don't always know what you're getting into. If I
Mhm.
actually had known what it was going to take me to get to that village,
You would have said no.
it was very dramatic, and I won't go into it, but it was quite a saga. But yeah, sometimes you are really leaping into the unknown, and
Mhm.
it's exciting, and it's also that's a really challenging situation.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's
people travel for they travel for workshops, they travel for residencies, they travel to teach workshops, and when you add in that level of out of your comfort zone of traveling, say, to another country, that is it's wonderful, it's exciting,
Mhm.
it's fun, but wow, there's always some moments where you think, "What am I doing?"
Yeah. And it just reminded me of something. I just finished my mentoring message 6, which is called Your Daily Domino. And what I talk about in that is this notion of constantly doing little things that could line up. And then when they all fall, they could lead to something big. And I was just thinking as we're talking here that what I was really talking about in that message was lining up dominoes to create opportunities that really are risks or challenges for you. Is essentially you're lining up dominoes to create a risk or a challenge for yourself. So you're doing this to yourself,
You're doing it
essentially.
to yourself.
Yeah.
And, at some level, I think we recognize that. We
Yeah.
know, okay, this one step, what is this going to lead to? What is this going to lead to if I say, yes, I want to participate in this, say, a 3-person show? Well, does that mean that down the line, I'm going to be offered a 1-person show by the gallery? You sort of, getting in there.
Right.
And if a lot of people plan ahead in terms of what's going to lead to what, and you don't always know, but that's kind of, something we do a lot is, okay, if I do this one thing, what else is going to happen? It could be a good thing. Could be a wonderful thing, could be a scary thing.
It could be or it could be nothing.
Could be nothing at all.
Right. The dominoes may go nowhere.
But there is that thing of once you take some small step there, there's going to be another one. And, maybe some people say, I'm going to not even go there. I don't even want to take that first little step.
Yeah.
And I think that's hard.
Yeah. And one of the things you had mentioned earlier, and I think it applies to all of this, and I certainly come across it in mentoring and workshops. I mean, just meeting any artists and just human beings, is self-doubt. A lot of self-doubt, a lot of negative self-talk that keep us from making even small changes, whether it's in our life and our painting, and certainly can keep us from big changes.
It's so easy to talk yourself out of it.
Yeah.
And especially if you have anybody who joins you in doubting.
Yeah.
And people have that in their lives. They may have a spouse, a friend, somebody saying, "Oh, I don't know.
Right.
And so you have to be strong enough in your own mind to get around that.
Yeah, and I think often that person that's joining you, it may not be a person that's literally there. It could be a person from years before. Your art teacher saying you don't know what you're doing, or a harsh critique when you were in school, and then that little tape becomes the person that sits in there all the time, keeping you from doing that. And I do think it's important to face those things and really, really be honest with yourself about what they are, and then do something about them.
And maybe take some pleasure in saying, you know what? You're not right.
Yeah,
you're not the boss of me.
Nope. And this isn't true, right?
This is not true.
It's not true. It's just a voice.
Yeah. And I guess, if we want to, and we're getting sort of towards the end here, but if we want to leave people with something, I was thinking, that it's really good to ask yourself, is there something in your life right now that you're really not being open to? You're really hesitating to take some sort of step. I'm pretty sure most of us could think of something that, we've kind of put on the back burner. We're not quite ready for it. We think, oh, that's probably not going to happen. If I try that, it's probably a dead end. But somehow it's still there. It's still on my back burner. It's still in my mind. And, if you ask yourself, what have you got there? Is it something that, you really could do?
Or should do.
I was going to avoid the should word, but
I mean, I'm not going to avoid it, because I think could keeps it in the abstract and just possible, and should is this has the potential to be really good for me, to change things for me in a positive way. Because if you don't, then you're what you're losing is you're the same.
The commitment.
Yeah.
You lose the commitment. Yeah. And I think it's also good to say, look at your own life. Say, what have I risked? What have I done that was hard? And where did it get me? And you probably have something that was challenging and risky at the moment. And now you look back on it and say, well, of course, that was a good thing. You did something. We wrote a book. That was a good thing.
Right. And it seems, looking back, it often seems so much smaller, like in its difficulty or challenge, than it did when you were on the other end of it. And you realize that the scale of these risks is often, we elevate the scale, the real perceived risk. But I think what we often don't see is the potential gain. I think the gains are often so much more than we realize, and the risks are so much bigger than we actually, sorry, the risks are so much smaller than we make them out to
Yeah.
be, and the gains are so much bigger than we actually perceive the possibility to be. So,
Yeah, I mean, you have turning points in your life that were the result of a big decision. I mean, you're in Mexico now. That was a big decision. I'm in New Mexico. This is a big decision.
right,
And both places contribute to who we are and to our art.
right.
And yeah, and you look back and it's hard to even imagine if you hadn't done those things. But at the
Yeah.
time, like you're saying, they seem pretty daunting. The first time you had that idea
Yeah.
was daunting. The first time you dared thinking of approaching me about the book, scary person that I am. How many nights did you lie awake going, should I? Dare I?
Email made it a lot easier.
True enough.
And I just want to mention just how little things, like making little choices, can lead. Like, you mentioned me being here in Mexico. Me living here in Mexico with my husband and my dog, my whole life being here basically is the result of one email that somebody sent to me just saying, hey, would you be interested in teaching a workshop here? 3 weeks after coming here to teach that workshop, we decided to move here. So, saying yes to even things that seem innocuous, and teaching that workshop didn't seem like a big risk or a big challenge, but I wanted to do it. And even that led to something, really, really huge. So,
yeah, it's funny looking back at those roots of things where you can pinpoint that moment, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, this is what Ross always says to me at the end of a podcast. Any final thoughts to wrap up this session?
You mean, yes. Yes. I always have final thoughts. I work with a lot of artists, workshops and mentoring, and this kind of thing comes up all the time. This idea of taking risks, of challenges, and committing to doing something and following through on it. And I really just can't emphasize enough the importance of it, even if it's something small, like committing to cold wax, or to committing to abstraction, or to committing to a series of 12 paintings. Those little things, they matter. They have the potential to impact your art, your personal life, your art career, so many things. And I think it's important to, kind of own up and commit and gather some courage and do it. Because I think that the gains, man, they're so full of potential, and the real risks, they're really pretty tiny.
Yeah.
It's basically staying where you are. That's the risk, right? The risk is just,
what fun is that? All right. Well, I'll be Ross again and say, well, that just about wraps up this episode of the Messy Studio. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, guys. We will see you later.